Hello and welcome to the Russian Empire History Podcast, the history of all the peoples of the Russian Empire. I'm your host, J.P. Bristow. This is Season 1, The Forest, the Steppe and the Birth of the Russian Empire, and Episode 64, Mindaugas, the One and Only. July the 6th is the State Day of Lithuania. The date was chosen as it is supposedly the day on which Mindaugas, a medieval warlord, united the various tribes of Lithuania and was crowned in 1253 as its first and only king, an event that is as good as any to serve as the foundation date of the Lithuanian state. You might be surprised to hear that it only recently became a national holiday as part of efforts to rebuild national identity in the newly independent Lithuania. Historians have been fairly sure that Mindaugas was crowned on a Sunday in July, but the actual date was not known. The government asked historian Edvardas Gudavičius to give them a date, and he decided on July the 6th. Why did we not know the date? Because the Lithuanians had not achieved literacy at the time of the coronation, and therefore we do not have any of their own records. We do have other records, though. One of the most important sources is papal documents. In order to receive recognition, Mindaugas ostensibly converted to Christianity, although how much this reflected his actual beliefs is very much in question. Whatever the case, converting was a sound tactical move against the Teutonic knights, and it meant that the Pope endorsed him as king. We also have the German chronicles of the Baltic Crusades and the Rus chronicles, particularly the Novgorod and the Halichvohinia chronicles. For these sources, Lithuania was the enemy, and they are highly prejudiced, but we can read between the lines. While the Germans conquered and colonized the ancestors of the Latvians and Estonians, the Crusades pushed the Lithuanians, until then separate tribes, into the formation of a state that would go on to become, for a while at least, the largest in Europe, stretching from the Baltic almost to the Black Sea. It will absorb large parts of the former Rus kingdoms, and as Mongol control recedes from northern Europe, Lithuania will set itself the target of taking all of the former Rus lands, a course that brings it directly into collision with the rising power of Muscovy, whose rulers also set out to, as they put it, gather the Rus lands. In this episode, we will look at how Lithuania coalesced. You will probably have picked up over the last few episodes that the German and Danish colonization of the Baltic started from the coasts and was mainly focused around those Hanseatic trading cities. If we look at the Baltic states today, we have 3 coastal states lying between Russia, Belarus, and the sea. Estonia in the north, Latvia in the middle, and Lithuania in the south. These countries do not entirely map to the medieval and early modern populations and states. What is now Estonia and the northern part of Latvia formed Livonia, What is now Kaliningrad Oblast, southwest Lithuania, and northern Poland formed Prussia. Livonia and Prussia were divided by a thin sliver of Samogitia, which the Sword Brothers almost got wiped out trying to conquer, as we heard in the last episode. Poland did not have sea access. So the Lithuanian territory lay inland. It could not be accessed by the typical Crusader tactics of sailing in and ravaging. Large wetland areas made it difficult terrain for heavy knights, as the Sword Brothers found out more than once, and it made it a much harder target than the vulnerable coastal areas. The fighting ebbed and flowed for decades. For reasons that are unclear, the Lithuanians appear to have enjoyed a notable population growth during this period, which meant that they had a large number of men available for military campaigns. The first references to Lithuanians appear in the Rus Chronicles as comments about cross-border raiding. They first appear as the recipients of Rus raids and attempts to impose tribute payments, and then in 1183 they make their own first serious incursion into Rus with an attack on Pskov and Polotsk. They appear in the German chronicles from early on in the colonization efforts. In 1205 the Lithuanians attack Riga, led by Vesta, ruler of Semigalia, and Žvelgaitis, who is killed in the battle. These are the first Lithuanian rulers mentioned in history. They are referred to as dukes. Later, probably in the 15th century, a legend of earlier origins appeared in the Lithuanian chronicles. In this legend, the rulers of Lithuania trace their ancestry back to Palemon, a relative of the Emperor Nero who travelled north from Rome with 500 noble families through the Baltic Sea to the Nemunas River, and then sailed up it until they reached a hill by the Dubsia River. Here they settled and ruled the country until the Gedminid dynasty took over. This rather overlooks Mindaugas and another ruler, Tridinis, historically attested leaders of Lithuania before the Gedminids. Right up until the 19th century, this story was taken to have an underlying truth to it, so it was rewritten several times in an attempt to make it more plausible. Palemon became a Roman fleeing the Hun invasions, or in other versions they were somehow involved with the Vikings, but modern historians reject all of these versions. You might remember a similar story that we have mentioned before, the legend of Rurik being descended from a Roman called Prus, a relative of Augustus, who also moved to the Baltic and gave his name to Prussia. These two legends served similar purposes of moving the origins of the rulers back in time and thereby increasing their legitimacy. For the Lithuanians, their chronicle was a reaction against the German and Rus chronicles that portrayed their ancestors as the enemy, and an assertion of their position relative to their neighbour and confederate, the Kingdom of Poland, which liked to claim that it had civilized the Lithuanian barbarians. While the legend of the Palemonids found no place for Mindaugas and other attested 13th century rulers, we do have some information from non-legendary sources. The first mention of Lithuania comes from the Annals of Quedlinburg, written at a convent in Saxony. An entry for March 1009 refers to Litua and claims one of the Lithuanian dukes was converted to Christianity. In 1219, the ruler of Halych-Volhynia signed a treaty with 20 Lithuanian dukes, the first such interaction that we know of, and the first time a contemporary document provides us with the names of Lithuanian rulers. Of those 20 dukes, 4, including Mindaugas, are mentioned elsewhere. For the others, this is their only trace in history. The dukes are also divided in the text. 5 of them are identified as elder dukes, elder as in senior. Živin Budas, presumed to be the most senior as his name comes first, Daugatas, Dausprangas, Mindaugas, brother of Dausprangas, and Vilikaila, the brother of Daugatas. Mindaugas would have still been fairly young here, so his position as an elder duke is taken as indicating that it was a hereditary position that carried its own prestige in addition to what he earned from his own achievements. Then came the rulers of Samogitia, Erdvilas and Vigintas. After them come a couple of families, the Rushkaichai, 5 brothers, the son of one of the brothers, and Plikienia, the widow of a duke, and the first woman to appear in Lithuanian history. They are followed by the 3 Bulionis brothers. Mindaugas kills all of them later and takes the eldest's wife for himself. After them come the 4 dukes of Deltuva, these days a village of 500 inhabitants, and finally Nitimiras, the same duke as was referred to in the Annals of Quedlinburg. Historians accept this treaty as the first evidence that the Lithuanian tribes were coming together to deal with the threats that they faced from German and Rus incursions. Given the increase in German attacks and colonization from the late 12th century, it's likely that this was a process that had already been going on for at least a couple of decades at this point. 17 years later, in 1236, the same year the Sword Brothers were destroyed at the Battle of Sole. The Livonian rhymed chronicle describes Mindaugas as the ruler of all Lithuania. We don't have a clear picture of how this happened, and the versions of the story we do have all date from much later. Part of the reason for this goes back to Mindaugas' conversion. It seems that even at the time this was regarded as rather more pragmatic than genuine. He was alleged to have continued to make pagan sacrifices, and according to the Galician-Volhynian Chronicle, he later rejected Christianity and returned to his pagan ways. As a result, even though he is now regarded as the father of the nation, he was for hundreds of years regarded as rather a shady character in staunchly Catholic Lithuania. Mindaugas' origins are unclear. He established himself in Navahrudak, in what is sometimes referred to as Black Ruthenia. We've already encountered the word Ruthenia, derived from the Latin word used for Rus, in the case of Red Ruthenia, the lands contested between the Rus and Poland. It's a term I'm going to avoid as much as possible because it does get a bit confusing. Black Ruthenia is the region around Navahrudak, Hrodna and Slonim, now in Belarus. As most of you, I think, are aware, Belarus means White Rus. But these are all later terms and they moved around. Some maps put Black Ruthenia in what is now Western Ukraine, that is, the region that we also call Red Ruthenia. Sometimes Black Ruthenia means Muscovy, White Ruthenia means Lithuania, and Red Ruthenia means Polish territory. For added confusion, some writers use Black Russia rather than Black Ruthenia, while others call the regions of Kaluga, Moscow, Tula, Ryazan, Vladimir, and Yaroslavl Black Russia. Lithuanian maps use Black Ruthenia, while Polish maps use White Ruthenia. As you can see, it can get rather difficult to follow. Did the word Navahrudak bring anything to mind? It's actually the Belarusian variant of Novgorod, or rather Novgorodok, the diminutive, which seems to have been the Slavs' favourite name for any new town. The region was inhabited by the Yotvingians, a Baltic people who contributed to the formation of Lithuania. As you can guess from the town names, the Rus controlled the region at times, and according to the tale, the Yotvingians hired themselves out to the Rus as mercenaries. Any Rus control was fragile, though, and the chronicles also mention fighting between the Rus and the Yotvingians. From his base in Navahrudak, Mindaugas attempted to consolidate his rule over Lithuania. By 1235, the Rus chronicles refer to Mindaugas, Lithuania, although it's not clear whether this means that they see him as the sole leader of a united Lithuania or one of several leaders of Lithuanians. By 1245, the German chronicles refer to Mindaugas as His Highness the King. On the basis of these scant references, some scholars argue that the basis of the Lithuanian state had emerged by around 1240. But it was not all smooth sailing. An attempt to conquer Smolensk failed. Efforts to consolidate ran increasingly into opposition from the other dukes, which was what led to Mindaugas turning to Christianity. In 1249, the opposition to his centralization broke out into a war among the Lithuanian dukes. Vykintas, the Duke of Samogitia, who led the Lithuanians in battle at Sole, Mindaugas' nephews, Tautvilas and Dividas, and their brother-in-law, Daniel Romanovich of Halich, his brother, Vasilko of Volhynia, and the Livonian Order, the branch of the Teutonic Order in Livonia, formed a powerful coalition surrounding Mindaugas. Lithuanian historians in particular see the emergence of Lithuania as a defensive measure that was primarily driven by the aggressive expansion of the Teutonic Order. The Knights were a threat that needed a combined diplomatic as well as military response. Daniel and Vasilko drove Mindaugas' son, Vaishvilkas, out of Navahrudak and restored it to Rus control. The Livonian Order launched an assault from the northeast and attacked the parts of Samogitia that remained loyal to Mindaugas. Mindaugas appeared to be in a tight spot, being pushed back from the north, south, and east. But he lived up to his name, which meant something like much wisdom, and took advantage of conflicts among his enemies to split the coalition against him. Mindaugas found someone to help him, a priest of the Livonian order named Kristijonas. Kristijonas provided Mindaugas with the knowledge he needed about the Pope, the organization of the Church, and how the Pope related to rulers within its territory, especially the Holy Roman Empire. Armed with this knowledge, Mindaugas approached the master of the order, Andreas von Stierland, still holding a grudge against Vikintus since Sole, with what the rhymed chronicle calls many gifts. He suggested to the master that he would be willing to be baptized and to give land to the Livonian order if the order could procure the recognition of Mindaugas as king from Pope Innocent IV. He also requested the appointment of a bishop independent of the Archbishop of Riga. This very much suited the order, who were, as you'll recall from the last episode, chafing at their subordination to the Archbishop in Livonia, a constant source of conflict. The order and Mindaugas lobbying met with a sympathetic hearing in Rome. Besides the fact that the Northern Crusades had already been dragging on for nearly 2 centuries, the Mongols had already ravaged armies across Eastern Europe, and the Pope was glad to welcome a new ally in case one was needed. So on the 17th of July 1251, Innocent ordered the Bishop of Chełmno to crown Mindaugas as King of Lithuania, to appoint a bishop who would be directly subordinate to the Pope, not Riga, and to start building a cathedral. Mindaugas was baptized with his wife, his 2 sons, and what papal records call a multitude of his subjects. The baptism successfully killed the coalition, although it would take a couple of years to fully implement everything. The coronation did not take place until summer 1253, with Bishop Henry of Kulm presiding, and the crown placed on his head by Master Andreas, with many other dignitaries attending. In the meantime, Vikintus died. Tautvilas and the remaining allies in the coalition attacked Mindaugas in Varuta, but failed, and Tautvilas ended up taking refuge in Halych. Mindaugas followed through on his promise to transfer lands in the west to the Livonian order, granting them parts of Samogitia, Nadruva, and Dainava. Although there was an element of pragmatism here, and it's not clear that he actually controlled these territories. Mindaugas had recovered Navahrudak and taken Polotsk. He set up his capital, established a court, and began building diplomatic relations, especially with his eastern neighbors and the Pope, but also reaching out to Western Europe. The first Lithuanian silver coins were issued. In 1255, Mindaugas and Daniel of Halich negotiated a peace, sealed by Mindaugas' daughter marrying the son of Daniel, and Daniel's son, Roman, receiving Black Ruthenia. Daniel's Lithuanian ally, Tautvilas, acknowledged Mindaugas' lordship and was appointed to rule in Polotsk. Mindaugas' son, Vaishvilkas, who had ruled for his father in Novorodak, converted to Orthodoxy, entered holy orders, and founded a monastery. In 1258–59, the Mongol general Burundai launched a campaign against the Kingdom of Lithuania, purportedly in response to Lithuanian expansion into Rus territory that the Mongols saw as their own. As a territory outside of the steppe, it is unlikely that the Mongolians were attempting to conquer Lithuania, rather than to inflict a military defeat and make them a tributary. The Rus chronicles say that the Lithuanians were defeated, although the details of what happened are murky. It seems likely that they did end up paying tribute for a while, but they did not have a Mongol tax administrator appointed, which is what would usually have been the case for territory the Mongols considered to be subjugated. According to the Rus chronicles, Prussians contributed to the Mongol army that invaded Poland the following year. The Mongols had not yet reached Prussia, so some scholars argue that this reference is actually to Lithuanians and Yotvingians, but there's no way for us to know for sure. Although Mindaugas had been successful in consolidating his rule, the Mongol invasion appears to have undermined him. Contemporary commentary suggests that the actual level of Christianization in Lithuania remained low, while pagan Lithuanians argued that the Livonian order and the Pope had failed to support Lithuania in their hour of need. The alliance with the order had already been controversial. The order had gradually expanded its control over Samogitia and begun building Memel Castle in what is now Klaipėda. They restricted trade by local merchants, and the laws on residence, marriage, and inheritance that they introduced were contrary to local traditions. Their oppressive rule encouraged resistance and would eventually lead to the Samogitians and Semigalians joining the Great Prussian Rebellion against the order. The part of Samogitia remaining in Lithuanian control was ruled by Treniota, nephew of Mindaugas and a staunch pagan. He began agitating against the alliance with the order for a rejection of Christianity and for a new alliance with the Mongols and their client in Novgorod against the order. This period is particularly poorly documented, but the Lithuanians did turn away from their Western Christian allies and begin attacking the Knights of the Order in Samogitia. Mindaugas is said by some to have returned to paganism, although these references are not contemporary. Pope John XXIII, writing 70 years later, said that Mindaugas had returned to error, but Pope Clement IV, writing less than a decade after his death, called him Mindaugas of happy memory, with no mention of any apostasy. The Galician-Volhynian Chronicle is the main source casting doubt on his Christianity. It claims that he continued to make sacrifices to the old gods, to burn the dead and conduct public rites. But, as already mentioned, this chronicle is routinely hostile to the Lithuanians and cannot be taken as reliable in this kind of criticism. It is possible that Mindaugas did not reject Christianity personally, but only came to see that the Livonian order remained the enemy of Lithuania, despite their shared faith. The knights had continued their encroachment on tribal areas that shared in the emerging Lithuanian identity, so Christianity had not proved the defense that they had been hoping for. What is known for certain is that the majority of the population remained pagan, and both the Mongol invasion and the poor showing against the order undermined Mindaugas' authority. Treniota was becoming a leader in the Bolt uprisings against the order. He campaigned in Latvia, reaching as far as Estonia, and in Mazovia, calling on all Balts to rise up under Lithuanian leadership and throw the Christians out. Mindaugas remained preoccupied with expansion into the Ruslands and sent his own forces in a campaign against Bryansk. While this was happening, Mindaugas' wife, Morta, died. He decided that he would replace her with her sister, who happened to be already married to the Drupe Domantas of Nalshia. If you think this sounds a bit outrageous, it was seen that way at the time too, and was clearly not acceptable under church marriage rules. The wife stealing was the final straw. Domantas and Treniota formed an alliance against Mindaugas. They finally caught up with him in Aglona, modern Latvia, and slew him along with his sons. They were given a traditional pagan burial, complete with their horses. Treniota took the throne and officially restored paganism, but he was not able to hold on to his gains. Vaishvilkas, the younger son of Mindaugas, the one who had converted to Orthodoxy and become a monk, had escaped Treniota and taken a refuge with his brother-in-law Svan in Halych. His father's murder provoked him into returning to secular life, and together with Svan, he took control of Novohrudak and the Duchy of Lithuania. After consolidating their power, they continued the war against Domantas, forcing him to flee to Livonia and strengthening their position. Although Orthodox, Vaishvilkas was of course a Christian, and therefore he moved to restore friendly relations with the Teutonic Knights and the Livonian order. He withdrew Lithuanian support for rebellious Balts, and the Knights suppressed the Semi-Gallians and Curonians. Vaishvilkas did not remain in Novohrudak for long. In 1267 he returned to his monastery and left Svan to rule Lithuania. Svan, a member of the Monomach clan, is another character for whom we have very limited information, but what we do have suggests that he was an ambitious young man. He was given towns in the northwest part of his father's lands, which gave him a strong base when marriage to Mindaugas' daughter brought him parts of Lithuanian Ruthenia. His appetite was in no way satisfied by this, however. The marriage alliance overturned recent Galician policy, in which they had been allied with Poland against Lithuania. Now Szwan combined with the Lithuanians to attack Poland. He did this with some success, taking Płock and killing the Duke of Mazovia. When Daniel of Halich died and Szwan succeeded him, his first move was to attack Poland again. This time he was less successful. After pillaging his way across Lesser Poland, his Ruthenian-Lithuanian army was defeated by Borisław V, who then mounted a counter-offensive with further Polish victories. We know next to nothing about his rule over Lithuania, which was short. He captured Turów and Pinsk, but died after just a couple of years. Most of his lands remained Lithuanian after his death. Waiświelkas did not survive for long either. Despite returning to the monastery, which would traditionally have been taken as a withdrawal from secular life, he was murdered by Szwan's brother Lev, who was disgruntled that Waiświelkas had given rule to Szwan rather than him. Why he would have chosen Lev rather than his brother-in-law is not explained. The House of Mindaugas ends with the death of his children. Although the papal bull that had made him king explicitly recognized his dynasty and the right of his son to succeed to the crown, there is no mention of any of his sons having offspring. As far as the unnamed daughter married to Szwan goes, she may have been given to an ally by Szwan's brother Lev, a union eventually resulting in the prominent Polish-Lithuanian noble family of Sash. But there were no further kings of Lithuania. We should note, though, that this situation is not quite so straightforward. In some ways, it resembles the discussions we have already had around the meaning of kniaz. Contemporary chroniclers refer to the rulers of Lithuania as rex, or king, fairly frequently. Looking at the nature of Lithuania over the next few centuries, we can even find strong arguments for calling it an empire. So why do we call them Grand Dukes rather than kings? The first and most important reason goes back to that papal bull of recognition, which declared that Mindaugas was subject to the Holy Roman Emperor. The rulers of Lithuania were not the only subjects of the Holy Roman Emperor to experience ambiguity around their title. In addition to that, we probably have also the same thing as with the rulers of Rus and its successors, a certain amount of prejudice against the East, and a desire not to recognize them as equals. Later on in our story, we will also get to see Lithuania and Muscovy getting into serious arguments about who gets to call themselves what. For now, however, Lithuania has emerged as a new power in the region. Traidenis, Duke of Kernavė, becomes the Grand Duke. He is a successful military commander who defends Lithuania's Ruthenian lands against Galicia's attempt to recover control. He restores paganism as the official religion of Lithuania, which will remain the case for the next 150 years, and returns to war with the Teutonic Order. During his 13-year reign, he will kill 3 masters of the order in battle. But we will get to that part of the story, and Lithuania's most successful dynasty, the Gedminids, later. Thank you for spending another year with the Russian Empire History Podcast, especially to all the people subscribing through whichever platform you prefer. I will be taking a break until around the end of January as usual. I wish you all a happy Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year, and a great summer holiday for all my fellow Southern Hemisphere listeners. Members can expect December and January episodes on the Caucasus, and for everyone, we have a massive year to look forward to in 2025. Join me for the end of Rus, the Mongol conquests, the rise of Poland and Lithuania, and the emergence of Muscovy as we head into the final stretch of Season 1. Thank you for listening, and until next time, goodbye.